I love characters, I love stories, and I love how these things work and interact with our lives. And last week we talked about leaving a legacy. Last week we talked about making a difference. Last week we talked about to be that Caleb who loved God wholeheartedly, and there was something very, very different about him because the Bible talks about having a different spirit, And I can't help but think that different spirit, it leads me to believe that there was a faith in Caleb that was so recognizable. I remember he came back with Joshua when they entered the promised land that God was going to give to them, and he and Caleb and Joshua came back with a different report than the other 10. But I can't, my understanding of that different spirit is that there was a faith that was working in this man's life. There was a faith that changed him, and it changed everything around him. And it affected everything around him. So we want to talk about that today. And so that's where we're going to go, and we're going to try and make this thing all connect from last week to this week, and away we go. So anyways, let's begin. I'm getting older, so sometimes I forgot my glasses last week. And you didn't know it, but I noticed it, so that's important. I go into these stores, and I've got to stand back here, and I forget my glasses. You got to grab those things, and Prince they just making it smaller. I don't know why, but they do. They haven't consulted me in any of this stuff, but they do. So we're back. We're good. I mentioned last week that I didn't do well in school. I didn't like school. From elementary on to middle school, high school, didn't like it. Teachers were very, very aware that I did not like school. And so I kind of resorted to doing other things, like I love to be the class clown. I love to get noticed. I kind of like to get into trouble, Maybe you've got kids like that, or you are one of those people that I just kind of push the envelope a little bit, and that kind of thing. So all the way through middle school, high school, I didn't do well. Those were difficult days. In fact, I'm a high school dropout. Never completed my high school. And you're thinking, what's that guy doing up there? Well, that's sorry, but too late now. But yeah, I never finished high school. In fact, I remember I was in grade 10. I got kicked out of high school when I was in grade 10, so I was about 16. But I was in grade 10 and already failed a grade. Those were the days when they failed students back in Saskatchewan, for sure. Maybe they still do. I don't know. But anyway, so I was in grade 10, and it was geography, and it was a boring class. Oh my goodness, these maps. And I always got in trouble. If you're taking geography, remember, there's all these maps of, topographical, all that kind of stuff. And I remember you have to fold them correctly. I could never fold my CarMax before we had all the GPS stuff. You pack these all maps, and I get so frustrated. They have to get everything right. I got in trouble for folding the maps wrong. So I got kicked out of class. And so I got sent to the principal's office, been there many times. And I'll never forget this, you guys. I'll never forget this. I'm sitting across the desk from the principal. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. And I remember him pointing his finger at me. And he says, Friesen, you're a loser, and you'll always be a loser. Yeah. I sat there, and I couldn't believe what I had just heard, but I had heard something that I had never heard from an educator before, never heard from my parents ever before. I'd never heard that from anybody, but here's the high school or the principal saying, you're a loser. You'll always be a loser. I stood up, walked out of that office, and never to return again. We all live with labels. That was my label. From then on, you're a loser. Settle for anything. Settle for anything. I was given that label, and it ate me up inside for years and years and years. It's a long story, and I can't get into how that all transpired, but through a praying, godly mother, I did land up back in school and did land up getting my, act together, so to speak, academically. I never did graduate from high school or anything like that, but it's a long story. You can't get there this morning for sure. But through God's grace, I was able to live out Genesis 50:20. And if you're familiar with Joseph and all the trials and tribulations and the life that young man went through, the more downs than ups, and I mean tragic events, and then obviously an amazing story. It covers numerous chapters in Genesis, but you get right to the end, and it says, "As for you," and he's declaring this. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." So I want to preface everything that when I talk about, we're going to talk about labels here. We're going to talk about Rehab, who had a label. Believe me, she had a label. And sometimes when we live life in that vein, in that alley, we forget about the fact that what man has made for evil, God has made it for good. So just when we think that life is out of control and there's no hope, there's nothing. And I walked down that hallway and I had my head down and I was this proud, cocky 16-year-old kid that said, my life is now over. I'm a loser. I'm a loser. You see, and then I read Genesis 50:20. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And that's where we serve an all-loving, all-knowing, and that song, God is good always, always God is good. Because God is in control. And so that's the premise of what we're going to go here through today. And many of us live with labels. And, I don't know many of you, but, if you thought about it, yeah, I've been labeled. And whatever that is, it's either by our own choice. It could be through circumstances beyond our control for sure. It could be, you're divorced, I'm labeled. You're single, I'm labeled. Your race, you're labeled. You may have a criminal record, labeled. Physical limitations, absolutely, labeled. Limited income, labeled. Fill in that label however you want. Whatever has been publicly cast towards you or privately, you have inherited this label. But that's where we are. And so many of us live with that. Today, we're going to look at that woman, Rehab, that lived with that label. Prostitute. As an unlikely recipient of God's grace. I mean, we all have people in our lives that, hey, they'll never come to know Christ. This family person, this friend, this person I work with, they're hopeless, useless. They're so anti-God. And then you think about the world that we live in and how upside down our world is right now and how against God from culture to whatever form imaginable. It seems like if you're an evangelical, if you're a Bible-believing person, you're going to be pushed aside. It feels like oppression at times. Whatever that is. But this is where we are today. That unlikely recipient. Someone who they'll never come to know Christ. And what good could it be? Well, we've got the story of Rehab. And just to back it up a little, if you remember Genesis chapter 12, God promised Abraham three things. Go to Genesis chapter 12, and we're going to beat around a little bit there in the Bible today, but Genesis 12, God promised Abraham three things. Give him the land of Canaan, which we discussed last week when the spies went and spied it out there. God would multiply his descendants. Once they crossed over into Canaan, the promised land, God was going to multiply them. They were going to grow and grow and grow. And that God would make Abraham's descendants a spiritual blessing to all the world. So they're going to get a new land, they're going to be plentiful, they're going to populate, and not only that, but it's going to affect the entire world. That's what God said. That's the Abrahamic covenant. So that's in the back of your mind. Now fast forward 685 years, and Joshua and the Israelites are camped on the banks of the Jordan, ready to fulfill that Genesis chapter 12. Joshua now sends two spies. And very familiar story again. as we look out, these spies, the last time spies went, as remember in Numbers 13, the result was a 40-year detour that should have taken about 9 to 10 days. It took 40 years. The Israelites were afraid when they heard that report, and they responded. That when the 12 came back, 10 had a terrible report, and they were afraid. They grumbled, they complained, they rebelled, and all this kind of stuff. And in their fear, they responded with unbelief and grumbling. That was their story. And so now they've finally reached the banks of Jordan, and obviously the city of Jericho is on the other side. Side note here this morning for us. Fear God, not the enemy. Fear God, not the enemy. There's a lot of things to be afraid of in our world, a lot of things. But let's not remember that we are to fear God, but not the enemy. And you think about that conversation that those 12 brought back with Moses, and everything kind of went upside down, and it couldn't have gone worse. It could not have gone more worse than that when those 10 gave the report, because they were afraid and they were fearful. And when you give in to your fears of the world, we forget about the fact that we're supposed to fear God and fear God only. And so that's where this thing kind of went sideways for them. And so we need to fear God, not the enemy. Israel, who had experienced all these miracles from getting out of slavery to that point, and yet they still couldn't get it. So Jericho now is on the other side of the Jordan, and it's in the way of Israel taking over that land. Jericho was a very self-absorbed, self-sufficient, grossly immoral city that was incredibly wicked and feared by other neighboring cities and counties and countries and all of that. Jericho was known. It was an unbelievable city that was powerful, and it had everything that it needed. It did not need God at all. They were self-sufficient, self-absorbed, and they were incredibly wicked. The culture back then, and as they find out and they discover history, it's horrible. It's undeniably evil, evil, evil. So that's what's standing in the way now of Israel as they're going to cross that river Jordan. So Joshua sends 2 spies. And where do they land up? They land up in a prostitute's house, And more than likely, obviously, there's only one way into this city and one way out. And probably Rehab had prime real estate on the wall where all the visitors would pass through and bore. And so they would know that that's Rehab, the prostitute, that house of ill repute. And so that's where we pick it up in Joshua chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, turn there, and we're going to kind of bounce in and around there, but that's where we want to go. So I want to read this story today. It's about 20-some verses, but it's so important that you collect this, because this is just not a story that we've maybe heard in Sunday school, if you did that kind of stuff, or you've heard it time and time again. But it's important to recognize that God's promises are hinging on these people, the Israelites, moving across the River Jordan and taking over the land that God has promised them. But Jericho is in the way. And so here we go. And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men, verse 1 of chapter 2. We're just going to kind of read through this. 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and they came into the house of the prostitute, whose name was Rehab, and lodged there. They spent the night there. The idea was to be there with them. And so, and they went and they came to the house of that prostitute, and it was told to the king of Jericho. So the news got out that the king told us, "Behold, men of Israel had come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king said the king of Jericho said to Rehab and saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." Get this. Here's a prostitute. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from." She's lying. "And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out." She's lying. "I do not know where the men went." Lying. "Pursue them quickly," she says, "for you will overtake them." She's tricking them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax and that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them for on the way to Jordan as far as the fords. That's nothing against Chevs. And the gate was shut down as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Before the men lay down, she came up to the roof. So she hid these men. She lied to the king. You get that? She lied to the king. She would have been executed immediately for treason. Immediately. I mean, she knew what she was doing. Her neck was on the line, literally. And she lied and lied and lied because she knew something. She knew something here. And this is where we pick it up. Before the men lay down and she came up to the roof. This is why she lied. This is why she tricked the king. And she said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us. And all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. What an astounding summation to these men that were spies. Let me tell you what we've been talking about here in the city of Jericho. Let me tell you what I've heard, and she would hear a lot. Being on the roof, being a prostitute, a lot of pillow talk, a lot of stuff happening in her world. She's hearing it from everywhere, and she's thinking, what is going on here? What is going on? For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, and to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and all the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me, the Lord, that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. Wow. She traded. She said, your safety, I'll protect you, protect me. When you come to destroy us, protect me, my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, all who belong to them. Amazing, isn't it? She wasn't just thinking of herself. She was thinking of her family. She was thinking about, there's no way out of this. We are doomed because of how she declared who was God in this polytheistic culture that they had, where multiple gods, the wickedness, the idolatry. It was rampant everywhere. It was likely in her house. And she says, that's all garbage. There's only one God. Would you save me and my family? That's what she came to. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with me. Give me a sure sign that you will save the life. Look at that, all again. Those who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us this land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by the rope through the window, for her house was built on the city wall, and so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned, and afterward you may go your way. The men said, we will be guiltless with this respect of this oath of yours that you made us swear to. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father, mother, your brother, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is in your house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business to ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear to. And she said, according to your words, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord to the window. They departed and went into the hills and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned. And the pursuers reached all along the way and found nothing. Then the 2 men returned, and they came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun. And they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land. melt away because of us. What a story. What a story of a woman who is so unlikely to be part of God's story. This woman doesn't have a chance in society, not even remotely. There's no respect for her. She is used and abused. And that's who God used to get his people across the Jordan. Never write anyone off. Never write anyone off. When God is working, God is working. There's three things I want to share with you this morning. The first one, faith moves us from separation to surrender. Faith moves us from separation to surrender. Here's this woman separated from God, but she knows, she hears, and she sees all of this action coming in and out of that city of Jericho. And she hears, obviously, it's no secret that Israel is camped on the other side. That's no secret. Everybody knew it. They're just waiting for them to cross, and then the war begins. And so they're waiting and waiting. And so they're on high alert. Oh, absolutely high alert. But she's also on high alert. Things have to change in her life, and she knows it. In Hebrews 11:31, it says this, by faith, Rehab, the prostitute, did not perish with those that were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. By faith, it says, Rehab, the prostitute, by faith. You see, that's an important, faith moves us from separation. She separated herself from all that she had grown up with, all that she was part of. She says, I'm giving that all up so that I might protect these two spies and open up the gates, so to speak, for Israel to come in. I'm ready. Faith separates us, and it gives us an opportunity to surrender. And she surrendered fully. Fully. It's a hard thing to surrender. You know, it's a hard thing to, yeah, okay, I believe in God. Yeah, okay, I mean, I come to a beautiful church. Yeah, okay, yeah, I have family and all that. I agree. You know, I agree. But is there separation? Is there a difference between us and the world? Is there a declaration in here? Is there something that says, I am different? Just as Caleb was known as somebody who loved God wholeheartedly, and he had a different spirit. And I'm telling you that our faith is supposed to be something different. Our faith is supposed to be something that's recognizable to everyone that knows us and everyone that sees us and all the world. And that's the faith that she declared. That's the faith. It moves us from separation of God to surrender to God. In verse 9, it says, I know the Lord has given you the land, she said. I know that fear has gripped everyone, she said. We have heard about the Red Sea, the battle against the Amorites, scared and doomed. So you know what? Who do you fear? Who do you fear? As I mentioned, we live in a very, very chaotic culture. There's so many things that, and we can't just leave the world out of the church here. You know, I mean, all of us step into the world, all of us step back into the culture, and then of course we come back to worship, we come back to gather. This is home, this is church, and we see it, we hear it, and we try to interpret all of this. But there's a fear, you know, and we can back this all the way up to 2020, and I know that all of your lives have probably changed as well. 2020 was I mean, it was epic in our family. You know, I had two jobs. I was working at Northview and I was working at CBC. I lost my Northview job because of COVID and shut down all that, which is fine. God's in control. I knew that I wasn't going to be working at CBC much longer, so that was going to be done. And so here's somebody who has done ministry for 40 years, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm sort of jobless. Well, that wasn't the only thing. And then 2020 comes along, and my dad passes away. Just, you know, he was healthy, and then he got sick, cancer, and all that kind of stuff. And so he lived in Saskatoon, and so we were going back. That was in May and June, and doing all that, and you know, and so that was hard. And my mom had already passed away years ago, And so you deal with that, and it's COVID, so you can't really see him. There's no funeral. There's nothing like that. We can do a memorial, just a little graveside thing with family, and that's it. And so you think about this, these things are happening. And then I'm doing a wedding in October for, my involvement at Northview, and I'm doing a wedding for a young couple, and I had a heart attack doing the wedding. Unbelievable, I knew something was wrong, but had a heart attack. Well, of course, that just kind of separates everything, and all of a sudden now you're on a different plan, and you're trying to figure out what God's doing and all that, and so that's there, and so all of this stuff keeps happening, and then I don't have a job, and I'm thinking, well, what's life, and then there's all kinds of things, and then this year, you get vaccinated, you don't get vaccinated, we got vaccinated, and I still got COVID, and so did my wife, And so then you think about that, and then my daughter, who was pregnant at the time when I had a heart attack, she miscarried actually the same weekend that I had a heart attack and all that kind of stuff. And so there's just sites and things like that just keep happening. And I know that everybody has a story. Everybody has stuff that's happened. And we can become incredibly fearful of what's next. We don't want to open up the door. We want to close the blinds. We want to, don't let anybody in. And what I'm saying is, where's our faith? Where's our faith? When there's an opportunity to trust God, as Rehab had, because her world was going to be turned upside down. And she recognized that this is the place and time that I will, by faith, this prostitute did not perish. Did not perish. You see, and that's the God we serve. That's where we need to be. So are you afraid of stuff today? Is there stuff that's just weighing in on your soul? Things that you're not in control of? Man, we want to be in control. We want to drive, we want to grab the wheel, and we want to be the one that directs everything. We want to be the one. I want to know this, and this. That's not faith. That's not faith. You want to leave a legacy? Live by faith. You're not in control. God is. And when you see that opportunity to separate yourself from that thinking, and you say, by faith, we're going to believe. See, that's where things are going. And then just as it just happened, about 3 weeks ago, somebody knocked on our door and said, my wife's not going to like this too much here, but knocked on our door and says, hey, we'd like to buy your house. I thought, oh, okay, that sounds good. And of course, real estate is kind of dumb and all that kind of stuff right now. And so within a week, we sold our house. And now we're thinking, oh boy, what do we do now? So if Alex keeps inviting me back, and you see my wife and I camping out in the basement, you know exactly what's happened, okay? What, isn't that Friesen? Is he leaving now? Is he going, But that's a faith move, and Nancy and I, we talk about that. We says, we have to do this together, okay? We felt that, yep, this is a good time, we wanted to downsize, we want to find something else, blah, 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 But then we don't have anything. What do we do? And so, and that's a third, world problem, obviously, where we're just, But the point is that you're all being tested. You're all being tested, one way or the other. Where's your faith? Mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, at work, whatever it is, your faith is on the line. It has always been on the line. It's always meant to be seen. It's always meant to be nurtured and to be watched and to be, where you invite others in with your faith. That's what happens. If you don't have the faith, you push people away. When you have faith, you draw them in. Just like Rehab. Come in. I know what to do. I know what to do. That's the God we serve. So faith moves us from separation to surrender. What a way to go. What a way to understand that. Why is all this very significant? Because Rehab reminds us that so many people seem like an unlikely recipient. Rehab, the prostitute. God He's got no limit love. And His love is often sabotaged by our short-sightedness. We don't see the full picture. We were never meant to see the full picture. God does. She didn't know what was happening, but she had heard enough to know that I need to trust the one and only God. Perhaps you're a person who even feels like you are not acceptable to God. I've got to be checking the boxes. I've got to be making sure this is this and this and that. God loves us the way we are. Faith changes us because of what God has done. That's that faith walk. Number 2, faith moves us from self-sufficiency to submission. Faith moves us from self-sufficiency to submission. James 2:25 and 26 says this, and in the same way, there's another shout out to Rehab from the New Testament, and in the same way, not also Rehab the prostitute, was she not justified by works when she received the spies' messengers and sent them on another way? For just as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead. Rehab declared that the Israelite God, in verse 11, the Lord your God, she says, he is God in heavens and in earth beneath. You can know and do nothing, or you can know and believe and act in faith like Rehab. Her belief is in the deal that she brokered with the spies for sure. She asked the spies basically, my life and my family's life for yours. And as she dealt kindly, she expects that in return. The word kindly that she used there, in verse 11, that word kindly is the Hebrew word hesed, which is a loyal love, a covenant love. It's a faithfulness attached to love. This word indicates action. It indicates action by what you know and believe. This is how you act. What you know and believe is how you act. That's the legacy we talk about. When we look back to Caleb, and he loved God wholeheartedly. That's an action opportunity. And there was a different spirit. That projects then, what was that was so different? Yes, he loved God wholeheartedly, but his faith was also recognizable. Today we are anchored by God's word not only to know, but to believe and act. Are we recognizably different than the world? Are we recognizably different in our family and how we deal with each other, how we talk about each other? How about the places where we work? Are we recognizably different? And I'm not talking about being weird or anything. I'm just talking about, is your faith visible? Is your faith at a place where it's attached to you and what you say and what you do and how you live your life? That's the difference that God makes in our lives. That's that hesed, that kindness that is there. And that's where Rehab is, and that's where she lived, and all of that is part of who we are. God's mercy evidenced in a prostitute's house. Isn't that amazing? God's mercy evidenced in a prostitute's house. Judgment, mercy, and deliverance knocking at Rahab's door. When those spies came in, she didn't know it. They knock on the door, and she opens up the door, and she knows these are Israelites. Here's the deal. What an opportunity. And you know what? There are moments and times in all of our lives where God knocks on those doors. Those watershed moments, you know that? We talked about that last week. Those watershed moments, just like when Caleb and Joshua came back, they didn't buckle into the 10 who said this about this and that about this. No, they said, it is God who we serve, and we can do this because it's God that does it. So this is one of those moments when that door, someone's knocking, and she changed her life, and she changed the direction of her life. Response was acknowledgement and acceptance and an allegiance to God. She abandoned all the things that she'd grown up with, and she says, I'm done with this. That's what she did. She put her faith in Jehovah, the God of heaven above the earth. She gave testimony of that faith to the king. She put her life on the line to protect those guys because she knew that this was going to be the protection that she needed and the relationship that she needed beyond this life. Works are a result of our faith here on earth to prove our relationship with Christ. Works are a result of our faith. They go hand in hand. Works are a result of that. Number 3, we'll close with this. Faith, that scarlet cord. So what did these spies do? They made the deal. Yep, this is all good. We like it. Here's this purple scarlet cord, whatever, and we're going to put this and give this to you, and then you put that on your doorpost. And I will make that known. Nobody touches that house that's got the scarlet cord. There are so many amazing similarities between that act, the deal that Rehab brokered and made, and the Passover that are so important for us today as we ready ourselves for communion. On the night of that final plague, and if you know the story in the Old Testament there, on the night of the final plague in Egypt, when the angel of death moved throughout the land, taking the lives of the firstborn sons, any house with the lamb's blood on the doorpost was spared or passed over. As God extended his grace to anyone, so he extends his grace to that prostitute who knew nothing more than actually the name of God. That's all she knew. But that was enough. That was enough. Hebrews 9:22 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Favorite verse of mine, Hebrews 11:6, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. For those who come to him must believe that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Rahab proved her faith by her works. Rahab rested by faith in the fact that God is sovereign. He's the one in control. Rahab accepts God's grace, his unmerited and unlikely recipient. The scarlet thread would identify her and her house and provide protection from the coming judgment. It would remind us of all of the covenant that God made. And as I said, it reminds us of that Passover by the angel of death, and that the blood would be on the doorposts, and any house that had the blood on the doorpost would be passed over. God's grace. And so here we are this morning, and we have the opportunity to reflect and to remember. It's symbolic of the blood of Christ that once applied will both identify and protect us from the coming judgment. So as we partake, we have to understand that this is a remembrance that God's grace is evident. He sent his only son, Jesus, to live and to die, to shed his blood on that cross, to be in the grave and to rise again. That's what God did for you and me, that we might have a personal relationship with God. Unmerited favor. It doesn't matter what you're labeled at, whatever label you have given yourself or somebody else has given it to you. We are all unlikely recipients. All unlikely recipients, just like Rahab. Oh, and you can say, oh, I'm so glad I'm not a prostitute. I'm not like Rahab. We are all sinners. All sinners. We are not the ones to judge. We are the ones to receive God's gift in salvation through Jesus Christ. We're going to take a moment now the worship team's going to come, and if you're serving, you can make your way to the serving tables, but I'm going to pray, and then we're going to have you as a congregation, you will be able to, during worship, be able to come and to grab and receive the elements from those who are serving. And if you just wait until everybody's served, then we're going to read some scripture and take the bread together and take the cup together. But this is a time of reflection. This is a time of remembering. And I can only imagine that when Rahab said goodbye to those spies, and she tied that scarlet scarf right around her doorpost, and people maybe would ask, I don't know, but don't you think that she would look at that every day and say, that's my salvation. That's my salvation. So we get a chance now to remember what Christ has done. That in his obedience, he gave us his life. He, by his death and resurrection, gave us life. So it's important that this is to be known. This is for believers. This is for those who follow Christ. If you're a follower of Christ, you need to have this. This is an ordinance that's commanded by God. If you're not walking in fellowship with one another, maybe you should just pass by and go fix those relationships, because that's important. You don't want to come to the table and just think it's no big deal. Oh, it's a big deal. This is life and death in the sense of what Christ has done for us. So, are you okay with God? Use this time to reflect.